Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try and finish off the Maxime Bernier Twitter roundup I started yesterday. And if you're looking for my second video of the day, I usually post two. It's on my local channel. And to find that, I'll try and put the link in the description, but it's on CanadaPoly.com. So you can find me there if you want to check out my local stuff. So that's where the second video of the day usually will be. I'm going to try and get to a second video here because I'm behind the news cycle. This is what I meant to do yesterday, but I think it's still important, so we're going to go through it. Maxime Bernier is tweeting, quote, "Libs impose diversity cult on universities." Quote, "What does equity, diversity, and inclusion mean in practice? Certain categories of people must be favored in academic competitions, while unfavored categories of people must be excluded." And I kind of looked through this news article the other day, and it's interesting, right? When you start equalizing people, you are necessarily discriminating against a lot of other people, a majority of people, and that's not fair. I don't think it's fair. I think that we should meritocracy, meaning like if you are good at something, you rise to the top. That is exactly how we should be running things, not making the job easier to meet your needs. Find a job that meets your abilities. That's the sweet spot, because then you'll like doing it, not coming in feeling like you're in over your head and people are dumbing it down for you. And it's even worse if that's exactly what they're doing. That's not how things should work. Maxime Bernier is tweeting, quote, "The left is every day becoming more openly authoritarian in Canada and in other democracies, and its attacks on our freedoms are intensifying. Censorship online, enforced speech, control of the press, climate alarmism, gun control, diversity cult, mass immigration, globalism." Yeah, it's really scary and very obvious when you start to really peel it back. Here's Mr. Bernier again. "Climate hysteria is intensifying everywhere. Parties debated declaring a climate emergency this week in Ottawa. And since climate change doesn't sound alarmist enough, the media are now officially switching to climate emergency, crisis, or breakdown." This is a link to a Guardian article that was leaked, a guideline, and we're going to have a look. Here's one of the tweets from Julie Carey Wong. From climate emergency to climate emergency, or from climate change to climate emergency, crisis, or breakdown, global heating. And yeah, if you've been watching the Canada Poly Challenge, you know that is, locally at least, not happening. Not happening. There's no local warming from Pearson Airport for the last 100 years. It's crazy. None. Weird. Okay, here's Mr. Bernier. "Australians voted for less immigration, less government intervention in the economy, and against the costly climate change policies of the left. The trend is growing everywhere and will reach Canada in October." And this is the New York Times report on the Australian election that just went down. And their polls were just as wrong as the last couple of elections have been in Ontario and Quebec and across Canada for the provincial elections that have happened since 2017. And that's interesting. And even maybe in Quebec when they had their provincial, although I think the CAQ was predicted to get a majority at some point. I was watching it. But anyway, I digress. Back to Mr. Bernier. "The more craziness and fear-mongering comes out of Ottawa, like this week's debate in the House of Commons about declaring a state of climate emergency, the more Canadians will react against it, as voters have done in several other countries." And this is in response to the Washington Examiner saying, as daily headlines become even more shrill, hyping climate fears based on projections made by unverified climate models, the international public is becoming increasingly wary of the Chicken Little claims impending climate doom. Yeah. Yep, we are skeptics. Here's Bernier saying the science is settled, and it says wheel of climate change, and it says no snow, heavy snow, lots of hurricanes, no hurricanes, dry, wet, cold winter, warm winter. And the alarmist is saying, "See, I told you." Yep, that's pretty much what it is. "Oh, it's weather out there? Yeah, it's climate change." Okay. Maxime Bernier says, quote, "Watch American climatologist Judith Curry explain how she came to realize that official climate alarmist consensus is not based on science." I watched the whole 17-minute clip, or it's an interview, and it was interesting. I thought it was interesting. She is a climate scientist, and she resigned her tenured position because the facts didn't back up what they wanted her to say. And she said, fundamentally, this is not right. So she left. I mean, that's important. It's important. Left-wing activists, this is back to Mr. Bernier. "Left-wing activists masquerading as journalists have completely taken over several media and are openly trying to manipulate us with their propaganda. Here in Canada, the Liberals are doing everything they can to accelerate this takeover with their media bailouts and censorship." And this is the piece I showed you earlier. There was a link to this post-millennial piece talking about the media tries to change your language to manipulate you. It's an interesting piece, and I largely agree with it. Here's that tweet I showed you earlier from The Guardian of the change Their guardian is updating our style guides to accurately reflect the nature of the environmental crisis. So whenever they refer to anything attributed to climate change, instead of saying that, now they're going to say climate emergency, right? So, I mean, that gets into the zeitgeist, that gets into people's heads. People are already depressed and anxious about this, and doubling down is not going to help, and nor is it going to change the weather, which has, as I've shown, remained remarkably stable at Pearson Airport for the last roughly 100 years. Is that a problem? Is that a climate emergency? Okay. Back to Mr. Bernier. He says, hypocrite. What about supply management? The cartel imposes the equivalent of a 2.3 tax on the incomes of the poorest 20% of Canadian household. You enthusiastically support taxes on the poor when it benefits you politically. And this is Andrew Scheer tweeting, Canadians should never have to choose between filling their cars to get to work and putting food on the table. But under Justin Trudeau, many are. This is not right. As Prime Minister, I will scrap the carbon tax and ... I'm not going to read the whole. Okay, I will. Hold on. Here's the rest of Mr. Scheer's tweet. Sorry about that. As the Prime Minister, I will scrap carbon tax and create the opportunities Canadians need to get ahead. I try and be fair and balanced. So I'm not trying to cut anybody off. Mr. Scheer deserves to have his tweets read in the context with which they were intended. Okay, and his tweet is in response to Trudeau 4 and 10 say rising gas prices at the pump are making it harder to afford necessities. Yeah, this election is going to be won or lost on cost. Kitchen table issues. Here's Mr. Bernier's second response to himself. Well, it's a thread kind of. And he says, Canadian consumers have to pay $3.6 billion more every year for all products under supply management. The system imposes a financial burden of $339 annually on the poorest 20% of household, which is the equivalent of a 2.3% tax on their incomes. Right. So, right, making products and consumers purchase more expensive or more affordable is the word I was looking for, sorry, and allowing the businesses that produce those products to open markets to engage other markets that they couldn't have accessed otherwise because it was closed because Mr. Trump or because the United States market was closed to Canada and vice versa, and due to tariffs, right? So having free trade benefits the businesses, benefits the poorest 20%, makes staples of everyday living more affordable. And I've heard that supply management was needed to make sure that we have a stable supply of milk and eggs, et cetera, et cetera. But that has been unwound by most countries. Australia and New Zealand unwound it in 2000. I believe the United Kingdom unwound it earlier than that. And so it's an outdated system that is unnecessary. And here's the other reason why it's important. Mr. Bernier tweets, quote, supply management is important because it is a litmus test. If you let yourself be manipulated by a small cartel, how will you be able to resist other interest groups and make the right decisions for all Canadians? You just won't. Right. I agree with that. Here's the last story I'm going to leave you with today. And it's a tweet from Justin Trudeau with a response by Maxime Bernier. And we're going to listen to Justin Trudeau's tweet because it's very concerning. I want to be clear. I don't want any government regulating the internet, period. And realistically, I want Facebook and Twitter to feel the effects of silencing conservative voices. I think that's very concerning. I think everybody should have a seat at the table and everybody should freely exchange ideas. And the idea that you can shame somebody into changing their idea or shame somebody to not sharing the idea or whatever is very, very draconian. It is not how problems need to be solved. It is not the way we should move forward. And the idea that the government can be our savior online and protect us is laughable and ridiculous. This has far-reaching consequences, and they can shut down any website. A $50,000 fine, done. Sorry about your luck, done. That's it. You can't afford that, right? $100,000 fine, $200,000 fine, and that's small potatoes. This is government. And they can just put their boot heel on your neck and say, sorry about you. Like, oh, you said something that's hateful. Turn your website off or we're going to charge you $50,000. Or even better, here's a $50,000 fine. And if you don't shut your website down now, tomorrow you'll have another $50,000 fine. Here's Mr. Trudeau. He says, social media platforms must be held accountable for the hate speech and disinformation we see online. And if they don't step up, there will be consequences. We launched Canada's new digital charter today to guide our decisions. Learn more about it here. And
platforms are failing their users, and they're failing our citizens. They have to step up in a major way to counter disinformation. And if they don't, we will hold them to account, and there will be meaningful financial consequences.
And here's Mr. Bernier. He says, being held accountable for hate speech and disinformation. You've been exploiting the Christchurch massacre for weeks. You've been lying about SNC-Lavalin for months. You've been lying for years about small deficits supposed to be gone by 2019. You must be held accountable. And I agree with that too. Mr. Trudeau is dangerous in what he's proposing, and it is very, very concerning. If you're not concerned, well, look into what happens when they start limiting free speech in this way. Look at what happens when they start burning books and taking guns and saying that these facts are abhorrent. These facts can't be spoken because they are hate speech. It's a slippery, slippery slope, and I fear that we're already a long way down. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day.